It started the night my car broke down outside Brainerd. Snow had already begun to fall, fat flakes drifting down from a low gray sky that promised a long, bitter winter. I was on my way back from visiting my aunt in Duluth, and my old Subaru finally gave out near a desolate stretch of Highway 210. Cell service was patchy at best, and my battery was hovering near 6%. I didn't have many options. I bundled up, grabbed my backpack, and started walking toward the nearest gas stop I'd seen a few miles back, Kwik Trip. I'd passed it earlier and remembered the flickering red and white sign. Something about it had stuck with me. Maybe it was the way it sat there, surrounded by thick forest on three sides, like it had been carved out of the wilderness and planted by force. The parking lot had been mostly empty, save for an old pickup and a white van parked in the far corner. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Now, I wonder if I should have turned around. By the time I reached the station, the snow had intensified. The lights from the gas stop lit up the falling flakes like glitter, and the surrounding trees swayed gently in the wind. It looked almost peaceful. Inside, the warmth hit me like a wave. I stomped snow off my boots and took a look around. The place was cleaner than I expected. Shelves were neatly stocked, the floors were waxed, and the smell of coffee filled the air. Behind the counter was a guy in his mid-40s, heavy-set with a gray goatee and a name tag that read Marty. "You look like hell," he said with a chuckle as I approached the counter. "Break down?" "Yeah," I said. "A few miles out. No reception. Was hoping to use your phone." He nodded and slid an old cordless phone across the counter. "Go ahead. You're lucky you made it here. Most folks end up stuck out there all night." I dialed a tow truck company. Got voicemail. I tried another. Same thing. Finally, I left a message and gave up. Marty raised an eyebrow as I handed the phone back. "They don't usually answer after dark," he said. "Not out this way. You want some coffee while you wait?" I nodded, not quite ready to head back into the snow. He poured me a cup and motioned to a small table by the window. "You can sit there for a bit, but just so you know, we close up at 2 a.m. I thanked him and took a seat, wrapping my hands around the cup. The warmth helped, but something about the place felt off. It was too quiet, not just empty, but unnaturally still. Even the overhead music had cut out. Then I saw it, a small laminated sign taped beside the register. It was yellowed with age, the corners curling. The text was handwritten in bold black marker. "Rules for the night shift. 1. If someone knocks on the front door after midnight, do not let them in. 2. The freezer in the back locks itself at 12:17 a.m. Don't be inside it when that happens. 3. If the woman in the white dress asks for directions, ignore her. She isn't lost. 4. At 1:11 a.m., the lights will flicker. Do not move until they stop. 5. Marty is only here until 12:45. After that, if you see him, it's not him." I blinked, rereading the list. At first, I thought it was a joke, some employee's idea of fun. I looked over at Marty, who caught me staring and gave a dry smile. "Don't pay that sign any mind," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Just some nonsense an old coworker put up. Been there so long, no one bothers to take it down." I tried to laugh it off, but the unease had already set in. Something about the way he avoided my eyes when he said it. The way his hand trembled just slightly as he set down his mug. It was just past midnight when the front door rattled. I froze, cup halfway to my lips. The handle jiggled again, then came a knock. Slow, rhythmic. 3 beats, then silence. Another 3. Marty didn't move. He just stared ahead, his face pale. "You didn't let anyone in, right?" he asked. I shook my head. "Good. Don't get up. Don't look." I swallowed hard and nodded, my eyes fixed on the counter. The knocking continued for another minute, then stopped. Silence returned. Marty stood, stretched, and checked his watch. "Time for me to head out," he said. "You can stay here until morning if no one shows to tow you. Just don't break any rules." I wanted to ask him what he meant, but he was already heading for the back door. He paused just before leaving and looked back at me. "Whatever you do, don't go near the freezer." And with that, he was gone. The door swung closed behind him with a hiss, leaving me alone. I looked at the clock on the wall, 12:46 a.m. Somewhere behind me, a humming sound started, soft and low, like an old machine warming up. The lights flickered once, then steadied. My heart thudded. I stood and walked to the counter, peering over at the back hallway. The humming was coming from the direction of the freezer. I told myself not to go. The sign said not to. Marty said not to. But curiosity has always been my downfall. The hallway was darker than the front. The hum grew louder as I approached the heavy steel door at the end. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hall. I hesitated, then pushed the door open. The freezer was empty, save for one thing. In the far corner, hunched beside a stack of milk crates, was a figure. I couldn't see it clearly, but it was moving. Barely. Breathing, maybe. I stepped back, heart pounding. Then the door slammed shut behind me. I turned and yanked on the handle. Nothing. It was locked. I banged on the door. Hey, hello? No answer. I turned back toward the figure. It had moved. Closer now. Still crouched, but I could make out long, tangled hair. Bare feet, a white dress, the woman. She stood slowly, and I backed away until I hit the door. Her face was pale and featureless, as if someone had blurred it. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth skin. I'm lost, she whispered. But her lips didn't move. The voice came from somewhere behind me. I'm not supposed to talk to you, I said, trembling. She moved closer. I'm cold. The lights above buzzed and dimmed. I screamed and shut my eyes, then nothing. Silence. When I opened them again, I was outside, lying in the snow. The gas stop loomed ahead, its lights off. The sign flickered once and died. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from the tow truck company. On our way. I looked back at the building. The front door was gone, like it had never been there at all. The tow truck arrived around 4:30 a.m., headlights cutting through the thick snow like blades. A grizzled old guy named Charlie helped me load up the Subaru and gave me a ride back into town. I didn't tell him what happened. How could I? That I'd been locked in a freezer with a faceless woman in white and then somehow woke up outside in the snow with no signs the gas station had ever been open that night? He dropped me off at a dingy motel just off the highway. I got a room with a flickering TV and a heater that rattled like a loose engine belt. I barely slept. Every time I shut my eyes, I heard knocking. Slow. Rhythmic. 3 beats. Then silence. I didn't go back for a few days. Would have been happy never to step foot in that gas stop again, but life doesn't always work that way. My car needed parts they had to order. My wallet was bleeding money. I needed work and fast. I found a flyer taped to the motel vending machine on my second day. Now hiring, night shift attendant, Kwik Trip, Route 210, $17 plus meal discount. Below that, a phone number. I stared at it for a while, hand hovering over my phone. It felt like some kind of test, but desperation is a strong motivator. I called the number. Marty answered. You sure? He asked when I said I was interested. You really want this job? I need it, I said. There was a long pause. Then he said, all right, start tonight, midnight. I'll show you the ropes. Bring a jacket. Click. The shift began like any other. The place looked exactly the same. Bright, clean, quiet. The same blinking sign. Same swaying woods. Marty stood behind the counter like he'd never left, sipping from a travel mug and reading an old paperback. When I walked in, he looked up and gave me a nod. You came back, he said. Guess I'm stupid. He didn't disagree. He gave me the rundown. How to work the register, how to stock the shelves, where the coffee supplies were, what to do when drunk hunters wandered in half frozen and asking for beef jerky. Then, finally, he pointed to the laminated sign on the counter. You remember the rules? I nodded. Good, he said, because we don't have second chances here. You break one, you pay the price. He wasn't smiling anymore. The hours crawled by. I rang up a few tired travelers, made a fresh pot of coffee, restocked some candy bars. Nothing weird, not at first, but the whole time I felt like I was being watched. Not by Marty, he mostly stayed silent and sipped his coffee, but by something behind the walls, beneath the floor, like the gas stop had lungs and it was breathing me in. At 12:43, Marty stood up and stretched. All right, I'm off. What happens if someone else comes in, I asked, already dreading the answer. Then you serve them, he said, unless they knock or wear white. And if you see me after 12:45, it's not me, he said flatly. He grabbed his coat and headed for the back exit, same as before. I watched him leave, and the second the door shut behind him, the silence returned. I glanced at the clock, 12:46. The freezer hummed. I forced myself to stay put. My knuckles were white on the edge of the counter. The lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere deep in the store, a can rolled off a shelf and hit the tile with a clatter. I counted to 100. Nothing happened. Then the lights flickered. 111. I remembered the rule: do not move until they stop. It felt like an eternity. The flickering started fast, erratic. Then it slowed once every few seconds. Each time they came back on, the shadows looked wrong, deeper, moving. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. Finally, the lights steadied. I exhaled and sagged against the counter. Then I saw him, Marty, standing just inside the beverage aisle, motionless, watching. "Marty," I called. He didn't answer. "Marty, you said you were leaving." Still nothing. His head tilted slowly to one side. I couldn't see his eyes, but I swear he was smiling. Wide. Too wide. I backed away from the counter. "Marty," I whispered again. He raised one hand and pointed. Behind me. I spun around and the front door was open. Snow swirled in, carried by a wind that smelled like rot. And standing just outside the threshold, barely visible through the storm, was the woman in white. She stepped forward. I slammed the door shut and locked it. When I turned around, Marty was gone. The lights flickered once, then twice, then stayed on. I didn't sleep after that shift, didn't even go back to the motel. I drove around until sunrise, then parked in a Denny's parking lot and stared out the window for hours. Part of me wanted to quit, walk away and never look back. But another part, maybe the bigger part, wanted answers. So I came back the next night and the night after. By the end of the week, I knew all the rules by heart. I followed them religiously, and that's when the new rule appeared. It wasn't there before. But one night when I came in, the laminated sheet had a fresh line added at the bottom. 6, if the payphone rings, do not answer. I stared at it for a long time. We didn't even have a payphone, not inside. But when I walked outside later that night to take the trash out, I saw it. A rusted old payphone booth that hadn't been there the night before. It stood by the tree line, half buried in snow. Receiver dangling, and it was ringing. The sound of the ringing phone cut through the night like a razor. High-pitched, mechanical, unnatural. I stood frozen with a trash bag in each hand, staring at the booth that hadn't existed the night before. There was no mistake. It wasn't just old, it was ancient. Cracked glass, rust streaks on the frame, the faded outline of a long-gone Bell logo on the side. The receiver swung slowly, as if moved by a breeze, though the air was perfectly still. I didn't answer it. God knows I wanted to. Something about the sound pulled at me, like a hook under my ribs. But I remembered the rule. If the payphone rings, do not answer. So I dropped the trash bags, turned, and walked back inside. My hands were shaking when I locked the door. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat behind the counter, and didn't move for an hour. The phone stopped ringing eventually, but the silence it left behind was worse. I didn't tell Marty about the booth the next day. He wouldn't have said anything useful anyway. That's the thing about him. He gives you just enough to survive, never enough to understand. On my 4th shift, I brought a notepad and started keeping track. The rules, the changes, everything. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was studying the place. That night, a new customer walked in at 12:05. He looked normal, late 20s, flannel jacket, eyes like puddles under moonlight. He grabbed a pack of cigarettes, a black coffee, and a protein bar. Didn't say a word until he reached the counter. "You're new," he said. "Been a few nights." He stared at me, no blinking. "You don't belong here." I tried to keep my voice steady. "And you do?" He smiled. Not with his mouth, with his eyes. "I used to," he said, until I asked the wrong question. I froze. "What question?" He leaned forward. "Have you ever wondered why there are rules?" I didn't answer. "Most people think it's for protection," he whispered. "But sometimes rules are cages, and sometimes they're bait." I blinked and he was gone. No sound, no door chime, just vanished. I checked the security tape the next morning. The feed skipped from 12:04 to 12:08 with static in between. No sign of the man. No footage of the interaction. The spot where he'd stood looked empty. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, but it kept happening. More visitors. Strange ones. A woman in a nurse's uniform who walked backwards down every aisle. A child holding a balloon made of stitched-together paper who never blinked. A man who bought 17 cans of soup and whispered, "I'm sorry," with each one. They never came through the door. The worst came a week later. It was a slow night. cold enough that the windows fogged from the inside. I was counting change behind the counter when I heard something tapping against the glass. 3 slow taps. I looked up. The window by the coffee bar was completely fogged over, but something moved behind it. A hand pressed against the glass, long fingers, wet, smearing something dark. I stood slowly and walked over, heart pounding. As I got closer, I could see it wasn't a handprint. It was a face, pressed to the glass. Eyes too far apart, no lips, just black gums and dozens of tiny, clicking teeth. It vanished as soon as I was close enough to see it clearly. I backed away, heart slamming against my ribs. Then came the knock. At the front door. I knew better. I didn't move, but the knock came again. Louder. 3 beats, silence, 3 beats, silence. Then the voice, right behind me. Don't you want to know what's out there? I spun around. Nothing. I reached for the emergency flashlight under the counter, but it flickered to life on its own. The beam lit up the end of aisle 4. Someone stood there, not moving, just staring. Marty. But it wasn't Marty. His eyes were gone, just hollow sockets. His jaw hung loose, dislocated. He pointed to the back door. I bolted, out the front, into the snow. I didn't even grab my coat. The cold bit into me like 1,000 knives, but I didn't care. I ran straight across the parking lot and into the woods. Branches clawed at me. Ice crunched underfoot. Eventually, I collapsed against a tree, gasping, trembling. I stayed there until dawn. When I made it back, the gas station looked normal again. Lights on, door unlocked, coffee brewing. Marty behind the counter. He looked up when I entered and said, "Rough night?" I didn't answer. He poured me a cup of coffee and slid it across the counter. "You made it back. That's what matters." "Something's changed," I said. "Hasn't it?" Marty didn't smile. "It always does." That's when I noticed the sign again. The laminated rules. There was another new line. 7. If you run into the woods, don't leave a trail. It will follow. After that night, I started parking down the street and walking to work through the back road, stepping through snow and old gravel trails. I couldn't shake the idea that the thing I'd seen, the not Marty, was watching the front entrance. Waiting. It had followed me into the woods. I hadn't left a trail, not on purpose anyway. But the fact that the new rule showed up afterward told me I'd slipped. I didn't know how much it saw, or remembered, or wanted. But I knew one thing. It wasn't done with me. Marty didn't bring it up. He never does. He just watched me a little more closely now, like I was a crack in a dam waiting to burst. That night, I clocked in at 11:58 p.m. sharp, grabbed the broom, and kept myself busy sweeping invisible dust out of the snack aisle. Every once in a while, I glanced up at the laminated rules taped to the counter. There were 7 now, all of them memorized. At exactly 12:02 a.m., the lights dimmed, just for a second, and came back stronger than before. That's when I saw the mirror. It hadn't been there earlier. A full-length, freestanding mirror sat between the fountain drink machine and the chip rack. Clean, impossibly clean. Not a single fingerprint. Its frame was carved wood, ornate, the kind you'd expect to see in an antique shop, not a gas station in the middle of nowhere. There was no rule about it. Yet. I crept closer. My reflection moved in sync with me. Normal at first. Then, just as I got within arm's reach, my reflection stopped. I didn't. I froze, raised my hand. My reflection just stood there, staring, head slightly tilted. And then it smiled. I didn't. I backed away slowly, and my reflection remained still, locked in that off-kilter grin, not blinking. The lights flickered again, just once. The mirror was gone. No sound, no drag marks, no crash. I stood there, staring at empty space, my breath loud and fast in my ears. I turned around to go back to the counter and nearly collided with someone. An old man, wearing a hunter's jacket and a bright orange beanie. He smelled like wet leaves and motor oil. He hadn't made a sound coming in. No chime, no footsteps. "Coffee," he croaked. I nodded and made him a cup. His hands shook as he pulled out a crumpled 5. "You the new kid?" he asked. I nodded again. "A few weeks in." He took the coffee, sipped, then leaned forward on the counter. "You seen it yet?" My mouth went dry. "Seen what?" "The man behind the door." I didn't say anything. He tapped the counter with a dirt-stained finger. "They don't always show up the first month, but when they do," he trailed off and looked toward the back hallway. "It's the knocking you gotta worry about." "I know the rules." He smiled, teeth like broken piano keys. "The rules don't always cover everything. He walked out without another word. I didn't see where he went. Later that night, around 2:30, I checked the back cooler. Inventory counts were off again. The place kept losing things, bottles, boxes, sometimes whole shelves of items that just vanished overnight. I crouched down to count the 6 packs of root beer when I heard it. A knock. Not from the front, from inside the wall. 3 times, slow, solid, wood on wood. I stood up, heart hammering. Another knock, closer. I backed out of the cooler and shut the door. The humming of the refrigeration unit felt too loud now, almost like it was masking something else, something wet and breathing. The knocking stopped. I turned off the light and left the door open just in case. Back at the counter, I stared at the rules again, wondering what I'd do when something happened that wasn't on the list. And then I saw it. The laminated paper had changed. A new rule had appeared. This one, handwritten in black ink. 8. Do not speak to your reflection if it talks first. I stared at it for a long time. The handwriting wasn't Marty's. It wasn't mine either. The letters were tight and thin, like someone had etched them in haste, trembling. I went to the bathroom mirror to check, just to be sure. Nothing strange. My reflection moved when I moved, blinked when I blinked. I waited a full 2 minutes before turning away. As I left, the fluorescent light above the mirror flickered once, and my reflection kept staring after me. I didn't sleep when my shift ended. Instead, I drove to the diner off Route 7 and found the waitress I'd seen before, the one who used to work the Kwik Trip years ago. Her name was Cass. She didn't smile when I sat down. "You're working there now, aren't you?" "Yeah." She slid a mug of black coffee in front of me. "You still have a way out. Quit before it's too late." "I need the money." She leaned in. "They all say that. Then they stay too long and forget what life looks like beyond the parking lot." I didn't ask what happened to her. She wouldn't have told me. When I left, she called after me. "Pay attention to the sky." I turned around. "Why?" "If it ever turns red, just for a second, run." By the time my 5th week started, I no longer checked the clock every hour. I no longer felt that sense of passing time. Nights blurred together into a single, endless shift, punctuated by rules, warnings, and things that couldn't exist in daylight. That evening, the clouds hung low, smothering the stars. The gas station lights cast a weak yellow dome over the parking lot. I walked in 5 minutes early. Marty didn't look up from the crossword puzzle he always pretended to solve. "Sky was green earlier," he said. I paused. "Green?" He didn't explain, just handed me the keys and walked out like he always did. But I noticed something in his eyes this time. Fatigue, maybe, or fear. The moment the door shut behind him, I locked it. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and turned to the counter to check the list. There was a new rule. 9. If the sky turns green, lock everything and hide. It hadn't turned green tonight. Not that I saw anyway, but something in that sentence felt urgent. Final. I stared at the front windows, wondering if the reflection I'd seen before would return. But hours passed quietly. Nothing out of place, until the gas pump started running on its own. I checked the cameras. No one out there. Just the pump screen flashing, 6 and the nozzle swinging gently like someone had just let go. I hesitated. I knew the rules. I should have ignored it. But curiosity is a slow poison. I stepped outside. Snow crunched under my boots. The pump stopped as I approached. I picked up the nozzle and carefully placed it back in its cradle. When I turned around, the parking lot was full. Cars, at least 20, all idling, all pointed at the building. No headlights, no drivers. The sound of engines humming in unison was deafening. Thick clouds of exhaust hung in the cold air. I stumbled backward, hand fumbling for the door. When I turned the knob, it was locked. I hadn't locked it. I never locked it from the outside. Behind me, the engines cut off, one by one. Pop, 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 pop. The silence afterward was crushing. I turned, and every car door opened at the same time. There were no people inside, only mannequins. Mannequins dressed in Kwik Trip uniforms. Each one held something different. Coffee cups, tongues, trash bags, a laminated rule sheet. One was wearing my exact jacket. Another had my name tag. Then they began to move, jerky, awkward, like puppets on invisible strings. They marched slowly toward the building. I banged on the door, screamed. The lights inside flickered, and then the door clicked open on its own. I fell inside and slammed it shut behind me, locking every bolt and dragging a display rack across it. When I looked up, all the cars were gone. No tire marks, no exhaust, just empty snow. The rule list was different again. Ta 10. If the pumps activate by themselves, do not go outside. Ever. I circled the rule, my pen trembling. I didn't know who or what was adding them, but someone clearly didn't want me dead. Not yet. I sat down trying to calm myself when I saw movement on camera 3. Someone or something was standing at the freezer section, facing the glass door, motionless. I flipped through the camera feeds. Every angle showed the same thing. Tall figure, draped in shadow, back to the lens. It hadn't come through the door. No chime, no sound. I watched for 5 minutes. It never moved. I grabbed the baseball bat Marty kept under the counter and stepped cautiously toward aisle 6. I turned the corner. The freezer was empty. I sighed and lowered the bat. That's when I saw it. Inside the freezer, on the frosted glass. A handprint from the inside. And then slowly the lights inside the freezer began to flicker. I took one step back, and the door opened. Fog spilled out, followed by a gust of unnatural cold. My skin prickled. The shelves inside the freezer weren't shelves anymore. They were stairs. Leading down into darkness. I slammed the door shut. It wouldn't latch, no matter how hard I pulled. So I unplugged the unit and shoved an empty cart in front of it. Then I sat back down and waited for morning. Nothing else happened the rest of the night. When Marty arrived at dawn, I expected him to comment on the cart or the smell of antifreeze or the missing display rack. But he didn't. He just poured himself a coffee and asked, "Did you learn anything new?" I didn't know what to say. He finished his sip and said, "You've lasted longer than the last 3. That's something." I followed him outside as he lit a cigarette. "You said I had a way out," I said. "Back when I started." "Everyone does," he said, exhaling a plume of smoke. "But the longer you stay, the fewer doors there are." "Then why don't you leave?" Marty looked out across the snowy fields. "I did," he said. "Once." I didn't ask him what happened when he came back. I almost didn't come back for my next shift. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, engine running, radio off, staring at the glowing red letters of the Kwik Trip sign. The snow had turned to sleet, and the wind howled like something alive. But still the building waited. The lights buzzed, yellow and unnatural, a place cut off from time. I went inside at 11:58. Marty was already gone. A cup of fresh coffee steamed on the counter. Beside it, a new laminated rule had been added. 11. If you make it to your 6th week, burn this list. Do not memorize the new rule. I blinked, heart pounding. Memorize the new rule? There was no 12th rule, at least not yet. But I understood what it meant. Something was coming. Something that didn't want to be known in advance. I stood there a long time, staring at that sentence, unsure whether to obey or rebel. In the end, I took the list off the counter and shoved it into the microwave. Watched it spark and curl, blackening at the edges until nothing remained but a melted mess of plastic and paper. And then the lights went out. Not flickered. Out. Every bulb, every sign, the gas pumps, the cameras, even the emergency exit signs. Gone. And in that instant, I realized something terrifying. The hum of electricity, the constant background noise I come to ignore, had been keeping something out. Or in. I fumbled for the flashlight behind the register and turned it on. The beam barely cut through the dark. Shadows bled into each other like spilled ink. And then the door opened. No chime, no wind, just open. I pointed the flashlight at it. Nothing but the black mouth of the parking lot beyond. But then I heard it. The sound of feet, bare feet, slapping gently on tiles somewhere behind me. I spun around. No one. Then again, left side. Aisle 3. I pointed the beam toward the candy rack and saw nothing. But I felt it. The presence. Watching. Studying me. And then I heard it. A whisper. It came from every speaker in the ceiling at once. Words I didn't understand. Wet, crackling syllables that crawled under my skin and settled into my spine. I dropped the flashlight. It rolled across the floor, casting frantic shadows. Somewhere down aisle 5, something began to crawl, not walk, drag. I backed into the cooler door without realizing it, the metal cold against my back. My breath fogged the air. Something huge was coming. I could hear it. Bones grinding, skin pulling over too many limbs. It moved like it had never been meant to stand upright. I closed my eyes. Then the knocking began, from inside the cooler. I turned slowly. 3 knocks, followed by a single, low groan. I reached for the cooler door and flung it open. Empty. But the stairs were back, the ones I saw in the freezer before, leading down, wet steps, slick with something black. I hesitated, then stepped inside. The noise behind me, the whispering, the crawling, vanished, like crossing a barrier. I descended, one step, then another. At the bottom, the stairs ended at a corridor of old stone, lit by nothing, yet somehow I could see, and there at the far end stood myself. Not a reflection, not a double, me, but older, hollow-eyed, skin gray like old wax, smiling. "Do you understand yet?" it asked. "No," I whispered. It pointed behind me. I turned around and saw the gas station. From outside, I was looking in through the glass windows. The entire store was frozen in a moment, my body at the register. Marty walking through the door, a customer reaching for chips. I watched it for a full minute before turning back, but the tunnel was gone. So was my double. I was alone until I felt a piece of paper in my hand, crisp, fresh, laminated. A new rule sheet. But now the title was different. Rules for the next one. There were no numbers, only a single sentence. You lasted. Now you protect. The lights came back on. I was back behind the counter. The clock read 11:58 p.m. Marty wasn't coming tonight. He never came again. The next morning, a new hire walked through the door, nervous, young, looking for extra hours and decent pay. I smiled at him, taped a fresh rule sheet to the counter. The list started at 1 again. And as the chime rang out behind him, I watched the sky turn a soft, almost imperceptible shade of red, just for a second. I didn't run. I had a job to do.